In this chapter, we'll discuss working with color in InDesign. We'll talk about choosing the colors that you want to work with, working with swatches, creating gradients, and then applying fills and strokes. So here's my basic document again. I can choose color at the most basic level by working with what's called the color picker. I get to the color picker by double-clicking on the color tile in the Tools panel. The color picker is divided into, the color choices on the Tool panel are divided between the fill color and the stroke color. So if I double-click on that filled-in square, my fill color, I'll be affecting the fill color. If I click instead on the stroke color, that's the black line around this, or the outlined box, I should say, you'll notice that it comes to the front, and I'm now editing the stroke color. InDesign has a couple of defaults built in. The first default, I'll select an item here so you can see the color applied. If I apply the default built in is a nil value fill color, so no color applied or transparent, and a stroke of black. So anytime I want to reset the colors, I can just set them back to that original default, which I get by clicking on this little icon in the bottom corner here. I also have two icons that show me whether I'm working on the color of my frame or the color of my text. I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that default, and I'm going to click on a different box. Right now you can see that any color I apply is going to apply to the frame behind my text. So if I double-click and select a fill color and say OK, you'll see that turns my box green. I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo. If instead I click on the T icon, now I'm affecting my text color. Double-click and select my green. I say OK. Now my text turns green. So these two little icons indicate what part of the frame you're affecting, the frame itself or the text within the frame. And I can tell that I'm editing a type color because I see this T icon in the window. And I can also add a stroke to my type. Unless I'm working with really large type, stroke type can be kind of hard to read, so I don't recommend using it too often, but that option is available. I'm going to click on the fill box again because that's what I want to talk about at the moment. The other option that's available, I'm going to click again on my black circle here so that you can see it being edited. And you know what? I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it more clearly too. The other option that's quickly available here is to swap the fill and stroke colors. That can be done with that little reverse arrow curve in the upper left-hand corner of the color. If I do that, I now have a black stroke applied to my object and a fill color of nothing. That's the same as the defaults only because I had the opposite of the defaults applied to my circle. But if I were to have different colors or different stroke colors applied, then those colors would swap. Now, to change the color I'm working with, I can just double-click and open the color picker by double-clicking. Here I'm affecting the fill color. I don't actually have a stroke on this object, so I'm not going to work on the stroke at this time. Here's my color picker. It allows me to look at the colors in the RGB color space. We talked a little bit about RGB and CMYK when we were talking about working with images. And the same applies to the colors that you're using in your document. If the intent is primarily a print intent, you probably want to stick with CMYK colors. If the intent is primarily a web intent, you probably want to stick with RGB colors. If you're using it for both, it doesn't really matter which one you're working in. So you can see here there are options to select the colors with RGB numbers, to select them with LAB numbers, which is another way of setting colors of light looking at a scale on a vertical and horizontal spectrum, and then a luminosity spectrum. And then the last option is the CMYK colors. It depends on where my cursor is located, which color space I'll be working in. So you can see I get this button that says to add an RGB swatch when I'm clicked in the RGB color definition options. If I'm clicked in the LAB options, I get the option to add an LAB swatch. And if I'm clicked somewhere within the CMYK options, I'll have the option to add a CMYK swatch. So that's the color space that my color is being created in, even though it still says I'm in the RGB color space view. I can scroll my slider up and down to get a different range of colors, and then I can select my color by selecting within this color box here. If I go ahead and say OK, it will change my fill color to the color that I've selected. If I think that this is a color that I'm going to be using in my document, I may also want to add it as a swatch because that will make it easy to go back and use repeatedly. We'll talk about swatches a little more in a minute. I'm going to undo that because I actually preferred it black in my particular layout, but that just shows you how you can quickly use the color picker to select colors on the fly.